Here's what truly unfolded today in a development that caught nearly everyone completely off guard. It was something no one in Washington had predicted, no financial outlet had factored into even their boldest projections, and no global trade expert expected to happen this quickly or in this exact way. Trump stepped back. The US president, whose entire political image is built around never backing down, never admitting defeat, and never letting an opponent walk away unscathed, showed hesitation live on television in front of the entire world. This happened while multiple countries were closely observing this trade conflict and forming firm conclusions about America's reliability and resolve as a global partner. Meanwhile, Mark Carney, the former central banker and practical strategist, whom Trump's team had underestimated as someone who would prioritize stability over confrontation and ultimately accept Washington's terms, is now the one defining the terms, Canada's terms, clearly and confidently on camera. Let's break down exactly what happened in full detail, why it happened the way it did, the exact trigger that led to this reversal, and what it means going forward for the USMCA, for North America's deeply connected economy, and for every country watching how US allies can stand their ground and still come out ahead. This situation goes far beyond a simple trade disagreement. It's not just about tariffs, lumber prices, or WTO procedures. At its core, it's about power in global relationships, how real leverage works, and what happens when aggressive rhetoric meets a nation that is prepared, patient, and determined enough to outlast the pressure. The key reason behind this shift came down to a major miscalculation. The Trump administration built its entire trade strategy on one assumption: that Canada depends so heavily on access to the US market that it would eventually give in after facing limited economic pressure. The idea was that tariffs would slowly damage Canada's economy, create uncertainty in its markets, and force Carney to choose compliance over resistance. But that assumption proved to be incorrect from the very beginning. It failed because Canada had more leverage than Washington anticipated. It failed because Carney quickly developed alternative strategies that the Trump team had not prepared for. It failed because the economic consequences were not one-sided. American businesses, consumers, and industries also felt the impact in very real and measurable ways. And it failed because internal political pressure within the United States began to rise. Republican governors, senators, and business leaders started contacting the White House, not to support the hardline stance, but to push for an end to the conflict before the damage became permanent and politically costly. That internal pressure ultimately created the opening for Trump to step back. It wasn't international criticism or negotiation tactics alone that caused this shift. It was pressure from within his own political base, from leaders who saw the financial impact hitting their states and constituents week after week. Not Carney's messaging, strong as it was. Not Canada's WTO cases, even though they were legally solid. Not pressure from European allies, despite increasing diplomatic isolation. Not even the daily market fluctuations showing the real economic cost. The decisive factor was direct pressure from Republican leaders in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Montana, making it clear that the trade conflict was hurting their economies and needed to end. Now, looking at Carney's conditions in full detail, this is where Canada's strategic success becomes clear. He is not negotiating or suggesting possibilities. He is setting firm terms. He is not proposing discussions or gradual compromises. Instead, he is enforcing conditions based on the leverage Canada built over months of consistent strategy, while Washington focused more on projecting strength than adapting its approach. The first condition is the immediate and complete removal of all tariffs that violated the USMCA agreement. There is no phased timeline, no extended negotiation, just full and instant elimination. Canada has maintained from day one that these tariffs were a direct violation of the agreement, leaving no legal basis to continue them. The second condition is the full cancellation of all Section 301 investigations and Section 232 national security designations targeting Canadian goods. These measures lacked a strong legal foundation from the start, especially against a close ally, and removing them is a non-negotiable step toward restoring normal trade. The third condition, and perhaps the most difficult for the Trump administration to accept, is a formal acknowledgement that Canada's countermeasures were legitimate responses under USMCA rules, not unfair trade actions. This matters because it defines the official narrative of the conflict and prevents any future attempt to shift blame onto Canada. Now, looking at market reactions gives a clear picture of who actually held the advantage. As soon as news spread about Trump accepting Canada's terms, U.S. markets reacted in ways that confirmed what economists had been saying for months. The trade conflict had been more damaging to the United States than publicly admitted. Lumber prices began stabilizing quickly as Canadian supply was expected to return. Energy markets adjusted as confidence in supply stability improved. U.S. auto stocks rose as investors anticipated the restoration of integrated cross-border supply chains. Manufacturing sectors also showed gains as companies moved away from costly contingency plans and returned to more efficient sourcing systems. These market movements are not just numbers, they reflect real-time judgment from global financial systems about who was benefiting and who was bearing the greater burden. Markets had already priced in the reality that Canada had stronger leverage than publicly acknowledged. When Trump stepped back, those risks were quickly removed, leading to a rapid and noticeable recovery. This moment is also significant in terms of Mark Carney's leadership and Canada's long-term strategy. What he achieved here is highly significant. He took leadership at a time when Canada was heavily dependent on U.S. markets, a situation that traditionally gave Washington strong influence. Instead of following the usual path of cautious diplomacy and compromise, he chose to stand firm. He maintained Canada's position under pressure, built alternative trade pathways, accepted short-term economic strain, and pushed through domestic challenges, all to prove that Canada's independence could not be negotiated away. And he did this while managing internal political dynamics and maintaining public support. His ability to now set terms is not luck. It is the result of consistent, strategic decision-making over time. However, it's important to remain realistic. This moment does not mean a complete or permanent resolution. Trump stepping back under pressure does not guarantee a long-term shift in policy or approach. The July 2020 USMCA review is still ahead, and underlying tensions remain. The unpredictability of trade decisions driven by political factors is still present. What Canada has secured is not permanent peace, but something more valuable: a proven ability to resist pressure effectively. Canada now has stronger leverage for future negotiations and a clearer legal position to protect its interests moving forward. Whether these conditions are fully respected remains uncertain. Trump's past patterns show that commitments can change based on political needs. Carney is aware of this, which is why these conditions rely on enforceable mechanisms within USMCA and WTO systems rather than trust alone. For those in Canada, this moment reflects a significant national achievement. The government faced a major global power, held its position under pressure, built leverage, and secured terms that reflect its strength. For those in the United States, this situation highlights the outcome of a conflict that could have been avoided, one that caused real economic impact on businesses, workers, and consumers. The USMCA review in July 2026 will be critical, and the future of North American trade remains uncertain. But today, in front of the world, Canada clearly set the terms, the United States stepped back, and a leader once underestimated proved capable of holding firm and succeeding. Canada is now prepared for what comes next.